As we talked about Sunday, the story of Jesus and how he has this guy come to him and say, how do I inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, you know the law. How do you read it? And he says, well, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He says, yep, you got it right. And Jesus says, you go do that and you will live. So he begins thinking neighbor, and he begins justifying because he's realizing he's not sure where what that means, starts and stops of who is a neighbor. And so Jesus goes into the story that we're familiar with of the Good Samaritan. And here's this man who's Jewish, walking along, he gets mugged, beaten, stripped down, and he's dying on the side of the road. And two neighbors who are Jewish, in the more traditional sense, walk right by him, and they're religious leaders, and they walk right by him. In fact, they are on the side of the street that he is, and they cross the other side to avoid him. Yet the Samaritan who's on the other side of the street looks across and sees this man who actually hates him because he's a Samaritan. And he crosses the street, and he patches this guy up, and he puts him on his donkey, and he takes him to an end, and he gives him what would be equal to about $200 to $300 and say, hey, you take care of him, and I'll come back, and if you need more money, I'll give it. I'll take care of him. You know, as we think about that, we start understanding that in this incident, he not only defined what neighbor means, he clarified in saying it's not just someone who you're close to or you know or is next door to you. Your neighbor is whoever is there in front of you. It's everyone. Your neighbor is that person that even hates you. But then he goes on to show us through this story kind of also a really amazing picture of what love looks like, what tangible love looks like. And so we've talked about this whole thing of loving beyond our limits. We've talked about a couple things that we've realized that we have to live in a capacity that's beyond ourselves. So we have to understand that to do this, we have to be connected to Jesus, and we have to understand his love and be able to be motivated and led by that in the dependence of Jesus. Now, when you think about this, and you think about Jesus, that was what he did. He came and he didn't just talk. He demonstrated. And he didn't just demonstrate with just powerful miracles, which were part of the demonstration of the kingdom. He also demonstrated the love of God by his own actions, by washing the disciples' feet and becoming a servant of all people, and actually serving us to the point that he followed God's instructions all the way to death on a cross. He laid down his life for us. And so that's what you call someone who has served us. And so when you look in Philippians, it says we're supposed to have the same attitude that Jesus had. And it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition in Philippians 2, 3 through 5. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Not only looking out for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. And so there's this part of expressing God's love is when you put someone else's interest above your own. And we know how to do that because God's done that for us. There's also a spot in which there's this place that we come to when we start loving this way, as far as putting another person's interest above our own. It's like the Samaritan crossing the street. You know, that step he had to make. I'm going to go there. And I'm guessing that he had a lot of things going through his mind, like this, I have a lot of plans ahead. This may be messy. I don't know what this is going to mean. And that's what you can expect. When you start loving and putting people in a tangible way with your actions and putting people's interest above your own, you're going to have that kind of take a step, and you often will have kind of a message shouting in your head that if you put their interest above your own, you're going to lose. And a verse that I love about this is in 1 John 4:12, because what it says, no one's ever seen God. So the implication is saying, I want to show you how you see God. It says, but if you love one another, God lives in you, and the love of God is made perfect within us when we love one another. I mean, that's pretty cool. In other words, as we step across the street, as we put someone's interest above our own, as we are motivated by God and we say yes to Him, we make that step and that choice, this cool thing happens. The love of God is actually made complete, and we recognize God living in us as we do that. You know, so all of us have commodity of ourselves, and that's really measured in time, energy, and money. And all of us have that, and we have to decide what we do with that. The thing we have to understand, according to the Bible, our time, energy, and money is actually not our own. We are only stewards of it. It's God's time, energy, and money because we're God's, right? And so John Wimber, the head of the vineyard, used to say it this way: we must remember we're just nickels in God's pocket, and He spends us any way He pleases. We're nickels in God's pocket, and He's to spend us any way He pleases. And so when we realize this, is that there's that spot where we take that step across the street. When the Samaritan decides to engage, he realizes this wasn't his plan for the day. This wasn't the plan that he had for this money in his pocket. It changed around everything, even to the next day. It was a big mess. He didn't know where it was going, right? But he stepped out in doing that, and God used it. There's a guy that was in the Palo Alto vineyard, and he was driving around San Francisco. There's a park, and there's a homeless man laying in the park, and it was pretty cold outside, and the homeless man didn't have a coat. Now, quite honestly, there's a lot of homeless in San Francisco. That's a very common sight. But for some reason, as he's driving by, that particular need stood out to him, and he just kept thinking about this man. He kept feeling compassion welling up inside him for this man. So he realized maybe God was motivating him. And so he turned back around, and he remembered, I have an old coat in my trunk, that an old ski coat. And so he goes around to the trunk, and he pops the trunk and opens it up, and there's his old ski coat. And right to the right of his old ski coat was a brand new, very expensive North Face winter jacket that he just bought. You can see where this is going, right? And he began starting to pick up the old one, but he kept thinking about this one. And finally, he just grabs the brand new jacket. He goes over to this man. The man's still sleeping. He tucks it all around him. He didn't wake up, and he goes back and gets in the car and drives off. And as he talks about this, you can tell that God blessed him in ways probably more than the homeless man. He was filled with joy because God used him. He knew it was more than him. You know, there's something about it when we're motivated by God and we intentionally put someone else's interest above our own. And God shows up in that for us, and especially for that person we do that for. So be looking for things that needs around you. Pay attention to what stands out. Ask God what you might want to do. How could you serve? How could you put someone else's interest above your own? Also be praying about creative ways that you can plan a way of loving someone, and ask Him for cool ways to put someone else's interest above your own. Give it a try.